Alright guys, welcome back to F1 Drama. Carlos Sainz is furious with the FIA for the penalty that he received that dropped him out of the points, as Ferrari have their worst start to a season since 2010 with only 26 points secured in the 3 races so far. But Sainz's penalty is especially harsh, it seems, especially because Gasly was not penalised, no further action after returning onto the track and taking out both himself and Esteban Ocon later on. What's going on with the stewards? Is this decision fair? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. Starting off with a quick follow-up on what we discussed earlier today with Max Verstappen saying the following on his first lap incident with Lewis Hamilton. It's quite clear in the rules what you're allowed to do now in the outside, but clearly it is not followed, he says. This of course was that incident in question where Hamilton sends it down the inside. In fairness, like, Verstappen left the door open here, right? I mean, the door was open down the inside. Hamilton went for the move because Verstappen braked relatively early, and by the time they get to the apex, which is pretty much here, Hamilton is very much alongside, and when they get to the exit of the corner, well, this is unfortunately Leclerc going off, but when they get to the exit of the corner, you guys can pretty much see at the top of the screen, there was still room for Verstappen on the road. Verstappen went off the track, and I don't really think there was too much in this, to be honest. I thought it was just good racing really from both parties. Hamilton says, I thought it was pretty decent. I mean, he braked early, I braked late, I was fully up the inside, and I think we both left space for each other. I didn't run him off the road, he didn't turn in on me, so we didn't touch, and that is just good racing, as Hamilton says. But Verstappen said after the race, it's quite clear what you're allowed to do, and he doesn't feel like you did. He reckons the rules weren't followed in this sense, and says, okay, we had good pace, we passed them anyway, and I'll have to take that into account for the next races. Now, I looked up here what the rules actually say for overtaking, as Hamilton did on the inside of the corner, and it says, effectively, a significant portion of the car must be alongside when overtaking if you're trying to go down the inside, as Hamilton did, and as it describes here, the stewards will consider if the overtaking car's front tyres are alongside the other car by no later than the apex of the corner. And you look back at this, right, when they did get to the apex of the corner, you've got to think that, you know, Hamilton is at least, his front tyres are at least alongside here, surely, when he gets to the apex. So I'm not exactly sure what Max is complaining about. I do maybe understand that he might be referring in the parts of Brazil where he was penalised for trying to send it down the inside of Hamilton going through the Senna S's. Now, in this case, Hamilton was significantly ahead going into this corner, and Verstappen just went in really hard, and, you know, even if Hamilton wasn't there, Verstappen would have had a hard time even making this corner, to be honest. And Verstappen was penalised for this, trying to go down the inside, and I guess he feels that if he did what Hamilton did in this case, by holding his ground and not allowing Hamilton to even come close to the apex, then he reckons that Hamilton should be punished there, whereas maybe he feels the stewards don't fully represent that. So, a bit of an interesting one. To me, there isn't really too much to say here, to be honest. I thought it was just good racing from both parties. Now, later on in the race, we got this absolute mess that was going on. There's so much going on in just this image alone. So, first of all, the Carlos Sainz incident. This is the big topic of this afternoon, because Carlos Sainz in the car after the race was not at all happy with the way this went down, and even Fernando Alonso says it was very harsh on Sainz. So, into turn one. Turn one in Australia is super tricky, right? It's a relatively high-speed right-hander. Chaos is always going to happen here, especially when you've got 3 restarts in a Grand Prix. So, Sainz understeers a bit. He probably should have braked a little bit earlier, goes into the side of Alonso, spins him round, and Alonso was initially dropped to the back of the pack pretty much, but then was reinstated after the red flag due to the Gasly and Ocon collision, which we'll discuss in more detail in a second. So effectively, all these incidents were discounted by the race officials in terms of what they meant for the outcome of the race, with the exception of a penalty still applied for Carlos Sainz. So, you know, when this penalty was confirmed for Sainz, because look, he did spin Alonso around, and I think in a normal racing situation, this would have been considered a 5-second penalty, right? Kind of like what Russell did to Sainz at the start of the Austin Grand Prix in the USA last year in Texas, right? But of course, it's a first corner incident really here on after a restart of the race. Yes, it's not on the first lap of the race, but it's still a first corner incident, which usually means they'll be more lenient about it. Especially when Sainz had no time to make up for this 5-second penalty because the race was ending just a couple of laps later, and obviously by the time they even gave that penalty out, it was pretty much getting confirmed they were already going back to the previous positions where Sainz would have been sitting relatively pretty and Alonso wasn't even penalised anyway. So really tough stuff. And as Sainz says, no, it cannot be, it's unacceptable. Tell them they need to wait until the race is finished to discuss it with me. Please, please, they must wait, it's too severe. If you guys have listened as well to the post-race kind of radio messages with Sainz, like he sounds really devastated, and understandably so. I feel like especially so because he had such a good, like he was a driver of the day candidate, I thought, here, Sainz, hands down. He got someone unfortunate with the red flag after he'd pitted, and they came at it about P11, fought his way up to P5, and was doing very well there and could potentially have pushed on to go even further, maybe. But he had good pace. He was making some great moves, especially on the one on Gasly, we'll see here in a second. But, for his race to end like this with no points is super frustrating. And, his words here are very harsh. He says, "It's the biggest disgrace I've seen in the sport for many years. And whatever I'm going to say now, I'd rather not say it." He basically hits them with the Jose Mourinho. "I'm not going to speak or comment on this until I go to the stewards and they revert this penalty." Now, they haven't reverted the penalty. It stands. But, you can understand why Sainz is frustrated now. Is it the biggest disgrace in this sport for many years? I would say probably not. There's some other candidates that are certainly up there. But, from Sainz's perspective, the frustration is very evident. He tweets out as well saying, "Look, I don't agree with the penalty. It ruined my entire race. Difficult to digest. And it means that, as I said at the start of the video, Ferrari have 26 points, I believe, from the first 3 races of the year. That's their worst return in over a decade since 2010, even with the tractor they had in 2020. So, not a good start to the season for them. Leclerc has 6 points. It's really a rough time. And Sainz was doing well until this point. And the controversy really arrives when you then look as a result at what happened with the Gasly-Ocon situation. So there were questions, could they potentially appeal this? And even Vasseur was like, given the way that it was handed out, this penalty, there was nothing they could really actually appeal here. Whereas Alonso's penalty, because it was handed out in a different way after the Grand Prix was over, there was ways that it could be appealed by Aston Martin, this time not. As I say, Sainz was making some great moves, the the dummy move that he did to get past Gasly early on in the race, and even in terms of pure pace, yes, Verstappen was managing his race, and there was even rumours that Verstappen's engine was turned down quite significantly, but Sainz was competitive on race pace compared to the Mercedes, compared to the Aston Martin, and just did a good job generally from start to finish. And even Alonso said the penalty for Carlos is probably too harsh, because on lap 1 it's very difficult to judge what the grip level is. Of course, it was getting cool, the tyres were going to be cold anyway, they were on late in the race, late in the evening, cooler track, cooler tyre temperatures, difficult warm-up lap. It's really difficult to judge turn 1, and loads of drivers are doing some crazy stuff. And Alonso's like, well, I feel bad for Carlos in a way, because it didn't affect Alonso in the end, him getting spun round, but Sainz still got the penalty for, for causing that collision. Now, I was kind of undecided on whether this was fair, whether it wasn't, but I will say that after what happened later on with the Gasly-Ocon incident, you've got to say that there's some inconsistent stewarding going on here. So Gasly locks up, goes off the track, comes back on in arguably an unsafe manner, goes across to the right-hand side, Ocon tries to go around the outside of Gasly, and Gasly doesn't know he's there, and just puts Ocon straight into the wall, and both the Alpines are out of the race, and that's what caused the red flag in the end. Now, Ocon, Gasly had a great race up to this point, made a miscalculation, took out both of the team, they won't be happy about it, and Ocon says no hard feelings, no bad blood and all this. Now, understandable, maybe it's the first of something to come here with the Alpine, 2 French drivers in a French team, there's going to be fireworks, this is the first that we've really seen of it, but Ocon was being very cordial, it's a racing instance, there's nothing really to it, and look, that's understandable, especially because Pierre Gasly is on 11 points on his licence after some incidents last year. If he gets 1 more point, which he would have got for a penalty, Sainz got 2 points on his licence for his penalty, that would have led to getting to 12 points on his licence, and that is a race ban in Baku, which evidently the team, Ocon, Gasly, Otmar, they don't want that, right? So they were trying everything they could, Ocon and Alpine, to say that, there was nothing going on here, just a racing incident, and I'm sure that Alpine were making that point across to the FIA. The stewards generally are more lenient with teammate-on-teammate battles and incidents, just because, the team's already lost out quite a lot because their drivers took each other out, so they don't generally like to come down too harshly on this. But no penalty, no further investigation or action necessary for this one, and it was deemed that it was a first lap racing incident. And this is the thing, right? If the Gasly putting Ocon in the wall and taking both of them out is just a first lap racing incident, where Gasly was very much coming back on track, I would say, in an unsafe manner, didn't check his mirrors, it was his fault, I would say, the collision, but that's a racing incident apparently, and I can understand it in a way. First lap, just after the first corners, tricky conditions, I don't mind them necessarily saying that's fine, but if you're going to say that's fine, surely you've also got to say that Sainz's penalty is also void, because, if that was a first lap racing incident, then certainly the Sainz and Alonso thing was also a first lap racing incident, in the same way that Stroll and Leclerc earlier in the Grand Prix was considered a first lap racing incident, and Stroll wasn't punished. So, it does seem that there's some inconsistency here, and maybe it's the teammate thing, and also, the other part of this, which I thought was pretty remarkable, is the Logan Sargent piece. If you guys go right back to the start of the video, you'll see in the background here that we've got Logan Sargent and Nick De Vries spinning off in the background, and this is because Sargent just straight up took out De Vries. Here comes Sargent off the restart. He's quite significantly behind De Vries at this point, locks up pretty hard. We're in potato quality here, but you get the picture. Goes into the back of him, locks up, and just takes out De Vries. They both go off the track and they're both out of the race. So, you know, that's a bad instant for Sargent, right? No reason to do that. Goes in way too hot. Like, obviously, De Vries wasn't having a great race anyway, but still takes him out of the Grand Prix. And, you know, as Aldas mentions, and I think understandably, that this could be a 3-place grid penalty for next race. This could be some degree of penalty for Sargent because he just straight up took out De Vries. But they're not looking into this. They don't seem to care too much. This was never even under investigation or hasn't even been in discussion. So, you know, I get it, but it just feels that if Sainz is going to get a penalty, then it does feel very unfair when those other two instances went unpunished. And Sainz would have finished a very respectable, what, P4 it would have been for Sainz, so that would have been big for Ferrari in the championship. And just because the race was ending right then and there, the 5-second penalty dropped him all the way to the back of the finishes. So, I mean, yeah, I do feel bad for Sainz on this one. Fundamentally, Ferrari aren't quick enough to do much this season anyway, but those points were big. And, you know, given the inconsistencies in the stewarding decisions, you've got to feel for him and Ferrari. Now, Haas's protest to try and change the order, that was dismissed, and they said, no, we're keeping it as it is because we're not going to give Hulkenberg a podium. So, you know, they were trying, but ultimately it failed. And yeah, I mean, those are the quotes from Sainz there, right? The most unfair penalty I've seen in my life. So that's pretty much where we're going to leave it for today. Many talking points though over the coming days, as I'm sure you guys can realize. And just a quick correction from this morning, I mentioned that it was 2012 that I thought the last time was where 3 world champions were together on the podium. It was actually 2018 with Hamilton, Vettel and Raikkonen, as you guys can see. So pretty much 5 years ago since we've had something like this. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.